Welcome to concurrent session B, Beyond Competency, what CBE means for critical skills, liberal education, and the future of authentic assessment. That's what you're all here for, correct? Excellent, then you are in the right place. I'm Alison Kadlec from Public Agenda. I'm your facilitator today, and we are very lucky to have with us three distinguished guests. Geary Schneider from the Association for American Colleges and Universities. Schott, the president of University of Maine at Presque, and Hopey, the president of Merrimack College. And so in the spirit of creating plenty of opportunity for conversation and dialogue such as it is when you have two microphones like this, I want to just dive into things. So would like to begin by asking you three if you could take a moment to introduce yourselves rather than me reading bios. Introduce yourselves and how you are oriented to this world of CBE, and then we will dive into conversation and questions. Sounds good? All right, Carol, let's begin with you.
Oh, okay. So I guess it's good afternoon, or practically so. Thank you for coming to this session. I'm Carol Schneider. I'm the president of the Association of American Colleges and Universities. How many of you are members of AAC&U? How many aren't sure? That's good. That's good. So you probably know that our mission is advancing liberal education and inclusive excellence, and that we have a very big tent approach to that I'll talk about a little more. What a lot of people do not know is that I myself began my work on what was then called competency-based education in the late 70s. My first job out of a very traditional degree program at Harvard, early modern history, plunged me into working with returning adults in a program, University Without Walls program, that was designed as a competency-based program, connected to work, sent me back to the basics, asking, what do we mean by a degree? What competencies are we talking about? And the degree was, in fact, supposedly a liberal arts degree, but there was not a single liberal arts major in the entire program. So again, what did that mean? All that work lives on in what AAC&U is doing now, which I'll talk about later. But another feature of this that got me interested in it was that while I was working with returning adult learners, in the same period I was also working in an open admissions institution in Chicago with very, very poorly prepared traditional age learners. High hopes, high aspirations, and no competencies, which sent me to the literature, a little late I'll have to say, again trying to figure out if people can't write and aren't ready to do serious critical thinking or problem solving, all the things we say liberal education is about, how do we get them there? So my entire career has really been spent trying to figure out how we help people develop what I'm now calling proficiency rather than competency. And that agenda has merged with AAC&U's work on liberal education, which is built around capacities that everybody needs for work, whatever work they're doing, for citizenship, and for their own lives. And how we weave those into programs and how we can do a much better job of helping students leave college with those portfolio of proficiencies, learning experiences they need. I am one of the authors of the degree qualifications profile. A one-page summary of that is coming around. I hope does everybody have it? So that's my orientation, a lifelong career spent on these issues, no longer using the term competency to describe what we're about, but very much concerned with helping build proficiencies, capacities that everybody needs.
Thank you.
So I'm Schott. I'm about 2.5 years into my presidency at the University of Maine at Presque. I think I came to this work from several different directions. One was a 25-year career as a faculty member in higher education, and realizing that things I was trying to do in the classroom weren't working, and just experimenting and trying to find better ways to reach my students, many of whom in all the institutions where I worked were first-generation economically disadvantaged students. The second was I've parented 5 children, none of whom have done well in a traditional education environment for a multiplicity of reasons, one end of the spectrum to the other. And as a parent, then, I have just struggled to find ways to educate my children and learned a lot about different educational approaches. And then finally, when I moved to Maine in 2012, I learned very quickly that the state of Maine had passed a law requiring all public schools to move to be graduating students with a proficiency-based diploma by 2017, 2018. And so I kind of put all those things together and began thinking about how our university could do something new and different to meet the needs of a new group of learners. And that's probably what I'll be talking about more.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Hopey, and I'm the president of Merrimack College. I actually come to this conversation with a lot of different experiences, kind of unique to a small college environment. Spent a good part of my career at the University of Pennsylvania as a researcher, dean, focused on, some of you may have done the executive doctorate in higher education, one of the architects of that. Moved on to Northeastern, where I ran the College of Professional Studies. And now I find myself running a small Catholic, primarily liberal arts residential college. So fundamentally different experiences. And so those experiences, the reason I'm at this table is because everything I do as a college president is not about tomorrow, but 20 years from now. What do I have to do today to ensure the success of that college and its value proposition for both its graduates and its future? And so when I look 20 years from now and I look at what's going to happen in the 18-year-old marketplace, which a lot of people here aren't involved with, but I think is a big part of what higher education is all about, I look at the fact that is that at a $40,000 tuition rate, $160,000 a year, that there will always be some market for that. But the question is it enough of a market? Is there enough kids involved? And so the whole conversation about CBE for us is about how do we take what we do well. We're very good. Merrimack's a great place to go to school. We're booming. But how do we take that and make that accessible to more people? And what that means is, I think if you look 20 years from now, a lot of the small, mid-sized four-year schools can't do what they do the same way anymore. We've got to do it differently. But at the same time, we have something that's very valuable to the country as a public good, to a student experience. And so when we look far out in the future, we think the schools like us are going to go to more of a 2.5-year model on campus and then off campus, doing other things, experiential learning, with competency-based education involved. So for us, we see really the opportunities in CBE not to be in the adult market or making more money, but actually in securing that all of our students that come to Merrimack College actually graduate with a degree and be successful. Because for us to come and spend 2 years with us, spend $80,000 and not graduate, really to us is we're not doing our job. And so we see CBE extending that out and getting most of our kids to graduate. We think if you look out 20 years, that's where it's going to be. And so our energy is spent on looking at that future and what that means and how we use CBA to do that.
Excellent. So you answered my first question for you, which is, or I think you did, what is it, what's the problem that CBE is trying to solve? And is it a problem that is relevant to traditional institutions and to those who are committed to liberal education? So Linda and Carol, I'd love to.
Well, for us, the problem we're particularly passionate about solving is that we as a nation need many more people with baccalaureate degrees. And the traditional forms of education have gotten us about 25 to 30% of the population there. In the particular area where I live in Maine, it's fewer than 20% of the population. And so I'm really passionate about trying to find ways to enable learners who do not see themselves as college material, who maybe were convinced by their high school experience that they weren't very smart, finding ways for them to be successful in college, and by doing that greatly expand the number of our citizens who have college degrees.
Well, I think the last two panels, each of which has been excellent, and you were part of one of them, have demonstrated pretty clearly that there's a constellation of issues which are being addressed through competency-based or proficiency-based approaches to learning. And it's really important to sort out which ones you're here to work on in order to figure out what is right for your students, your institution, and above all, your service to society. I'm an historian by training, and so when I look at this, what I see is that we put together a certain model for education a century ago, at a point where 3 to 5% of all students were actually going to higher education. And it was a model that was built on the assumption that transmitting the most important knowledge to students was the essence of a great education. And we have an assessment set of practices still being used, but frankly, too many faculty and too many of the so-called competency programs that are built around checking to see whether you've retained the knowledge long enough to get through the exam, which we, in some cases, are calling competency. But in fact, we're in a world in which everybody needs more education, in which we are the most powerful democracy, the most globally engaged democracy. We have responsibilities to the larger world, to our own society, to problems we need to solve at home, and to a changing economy. And so, to my mind, the whole emphasis on learning outcomes, proficiencies, competencies is all part of trying to reorient ourselves to a knowledge society in which we no longer imagine, not for a minute, that we can figure out what the most important information to deliver is, but we know that we have to teach students what it means, the difference between an opinion and an evidence-based analysis. We need to give them many experiences in using knowledge, evidence, judgment, experience, collaboration, engagement with contestation, all those things to solve problems. And so we're reinventing what we're doing educationally to put, as people say routinely on this, what students know and can do. But I think it's not just what they know and can do. Can they combine knowledge, various analytical skills, judgment, considered judgment, and application? Can they put all that together and apply it to complex questions and problems? That's what we're trying to do educationally. That's what AAC&U sees itself, trying to help everybody learn how to do better. We try to learn from your experiments and lift them up to others. But we're in a different mode, and so to my mind, this is all part of a long-term shift away from seat time and credit hours toward meaningful, deep forms of learning that are powerful and empowering, and try to figure out how to do that at scale, which is a huge challenge.
Okay, great. So what is your take on the popular narratives out there that CBE, and this is, so these are, we'll start with the more generous ones. So CBE is only for working adults. It's only for career and technical programs. I think underneath that there are also others that we can get. Well, let's start there, and then we can go to others of those. Chris?
Yeah, you know, I think I have a unique experience being both, having worked in adult ed for many years, building a large program, and now running a residential school. I think the problem in higher ed right now is that we use the words integrity and quality the wrong way, right? We think full-time faculty member in the classroom, PhD, the whole 9 yards, and if you're at that level, that's integrity and quality. That's all about an input. It's not about the outputs, right? And I think in higher ed, the conversation's starting, but it's really about the outcomes of education and what we're trying to do. I think the system is built on inputs, and so we measure the rankings of it as about an input system. But the reality is that I think more and more, as the price goes up, as the value proposition changes, it's really about outcomes. So I think for a lot of schools, the adult ed side has been the easy side to do because it's easier to understand, measure, and that measure usually is how much money you make extra, right? I think what's happening though is that as the real conversation in the country is really about outcomes, what is this huge public investment? What is this all about, this money we're putting into it? How do we ensure the outcomes of what the society needs, what the individual needs? And I think CBE is another kind of way of changing the conversation about integrity and quality to more of the outcomes. I think it's a catalyst for that. Now, it's all over the place right now, let's be honest, okay? It's kind of like here, there, everywhere. But the reality is that it's a conversation. And the conversation is beginning to have what the things we've avoided to talk about for 50 years. And I think that's really the key to CBE. What it ends up like in 20 years, I don't think anybody knows. But I do know this, that the system we have now is in crisis because we can no longer, government, society is no longer willing to fund the full bill. Individuals have to take up more of that bill. And as individuals want to pay for that, if they have to pay for that, that's a huge investment. And so that value proposition, that whole formula that we've built an entire system on is changing. And so I think CBE is one of a couple of new innovations that are going to happen over the next 20 years that are going to kind of alter the landscape for all of us. You know, the idea of the Carnegie system, you know, I don't think the Carnegie system was really developed or built as a degree completion kind of, you know, to the credits count as a degree. It was done more for folks like us to count how much, if we could qualify for retirement, right? So that system got adapted 100 years ago to today, but the reality is it's going to change again. And I think this idea of moving from seat time to experiences, to how do you measure an outcome of an individual is really what's key. And so for me, at our college, we use credits because we have to, but the reality is that, we're in the classroom, my kids are in the classroom for 16 hours a week, but they're residential. They live and breathe the institution all day long. It's an amazing experience. And the question is, how do you take that full range of social, intellectual kind of experiences and transform them from an 18-year-old experience to someone who's 19, 20, 21, 22, 25, 30. How do you do that? Because I know when our kids come to our school, they're not ready for prime time, not even close. They have no experiences. We spend most of our time engineering opportunities for them to learn something in the classroom, out of the classroom. Adults have a more advantage. They have good and bad experiences along the way. But to me, the future is really going to be about, given the cost structures that 4 years is too much now to kind of pay for that, how do you shrink that down but still have the integrity and quality of the degree, and how do you put that whole package together? I don't think we have the answer yet, but I do know, sitting in my seat as a college president, that there's no question that the current model is not sustainable. It must change simply because who pays for it won't pay for it anymore.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the biggest drivers.
Okay, we're going to go back to the only for adults in career and tech ed. Who?
Well, we have designed our program in response to what's happening in K through 12 education throughout New England. So in our case, it's clearly, and we have about 30% of our population are adult learners. We think it will work well with them, but it's primarily designed for the on-campus, traditionally aged students. And we're doing it because we think it's going to lead to greater student success. We're setting high standards for them. It's not a dumbing down. We actually think getting them to proficiency, as we call it, on the general learning education outcomes, their program learning outcomes, and then these, what we're calling essential learning outcomes, which float above the entire curriculum and are really responsive to employers. Getting them to proficiency in all of those will mean that they are better prepared than they would have been under a traditional curriculum. And we're circling back around and providing all the support services that we think will help get them to proficiency. And I can talk more about that later. But for us, it's very much in response to changes in public education throughout New England.
Okay, great.
Well, I agree with much of what's been said, but let me add a few additional complications of my own. Linda flattered us actually at Presque by using the essential learning outcomes, which were developed in dialogue, there on the sheet you've been given, in dialogue with hundreds of colleges and universities with their faculty about what you perceived students to really need for 21st century learning, and then a dialogue that expanded to include employers. And we did all this because we do believe that when you're in a period of change, you really need to have clarity about what you're aiming for. Where are you going? Where are you helping your students to go? What do they need to be really well prepared for a fluid, dynamic, innovation-fueled economy, for democracy, and for the changes that we're all experiencing in every part of our lives? We assume an education that's preparing people for complexity and change, whether they are adults or traditional age students. The degree qualifications profile on the back side is the sort of how-to. There's a much longer document, which if you haven't seen, you should look at it. But it's really saying what ought to be in your programs if these essential learning outcomes are your goals. How should general education be redesigned? I've been recently talking about the need for an intelligent redesign of general education, making it first to final year, not just the first 2 years, making it a dynamic location for students to work on complex questions and projects, including things that take them off campus. How does your major get organized? How does it intersect with general education? But also, the authors of the DQP think the most expansive or innovative aspect of it is the emphasis on applied and collaborative learning. There's an assertion in this framework that every student needs to have experiences of applying their learning in real-world contexts. Now, for the 18-year-old, you're going to have to do exactly what you just said. You're going to have to create experiences in which that can happen. But for the returning adult, they have a lot of applied learning experiences, and the expectation in writing the DQP was that a returning adult could very likely bring in experiences from the workplace, from the community, from the military that could qualify toward different parts of this degree, possibly some of the specialized learning as well, maybe some of the general learning, and that we ought to take seriously the probability that they already have things learned in life that can be applied toward a less expensive, shortened degree, and that we have an obligation to figure out whether that is, or what that is. But I can't emphasize too strongly, we have to be past the days when we think about a liberal or liberal arts education as sitting in class, taking notes and listening. People need to be out there, working on collaborative projects, getting experiential learning of various kinds, and we need to take responsibility for assessing what they're getting out of their applied learning, just as we do out of their more traditional learning.
Great, thank you. So since this is a good opportunity to say that it's John Dewey's birthday today, which I learned this morning. Amy Lighton sent me an email saying, hey, it's John Dewey's birthday today. And there was a quote on NPR this morning, a Dewey quote, that if you want students to learn things, give them something to do, not something to learn, right?
Exactly.
And so I think that this is a challenging topic, though, to think about CBE in traditional institutions and in traditional liberal education. And I would like to hear more about what constitutes the intelligent redesign of general education, but to go back to get into this question of authentic assessment. You know, I said this morning in the panel that it's my hope that CBE will have a positive and significant influence on traditional higher ed and on higher ed in general around the commitment to truly robust and authentic learning outcomes work and assessment work. And as you're talking about the DQP and LEAP, I'm curious to know how you and your positions and your experiences at your institutions and associations think about the role of CBE and authentic assessment and learning outcomes work and what the promise is here.
Well, let me jump in on that. I said this in my opening comments, let me say again, our assumption as an association is that too many students who do finish college are leaving without a significant chunk of the proficiencies that are described in the essential learning outcomes and the DQP. That we have to be far more intentional and better organized to help students leave with the learning they need. We think the evidence is overwhelming on that point. We publish and synthesize that evidence. A couple of years ago, we brought out something called Making Progress, what we know about students' achievement of liberal education outcomes, trying to key the findings to what's on the essential learning outcomes page. And the fact of the matter is almost everything we know or think we know about learning in higher education is either based on local insights or based on surveys. We're asking students on NESE and SERP and other surveys, do you think you made gains on critical thinking? Do you think you made gains on problem solving? Do you know more about the rest of the world? There is precious little direct assessment actually going on, authentic assessment that looks at what is happening over time to a student. So we may well be asking great assessment things in our courses, but the question of whether or not they're getting better at critical thinking or problem solving or ethical reasoning or the application of learning or all the other outcomes, whether they're gaining over time, we are not well organized to answer that question. AAC&U has moved into this space with the help of the federal government and State Farm Insurance. We had a fair amount of money to work with hundreds of faculty members across the country developing scoring rubrics called value rubrics that are key to the intellectual skills, the personal social responsibility, and the applied learning on this essential learning outcome sheet. And there's now a big experiment going on in many private institutions and 68 public institutions in 9 states. If our colleagues from the Gates Foundation are still here, let me thank you for supporting that, to see whether we can use those rubrics against students' actual work. Looking at work from students who are 3/4 of the way through college, does their work show that they are gaining some of these essential learning outcomes that most people would think are fundamental for work as well as for life and citizenship? So another change in progress, but we are hoping that over time, the focus will shift away from the one-off standardized test, which is not connected to the curriculum, to making students' own authentic work, whether it's in e-portfolios or other forms. The central concern, the central evidence, I'd like to see this be happening in K-12. I'd like to see much more attention to the assignments we're actually giving students in K-12, whether or not they're giving them opportunities to develop the proficiencies they need, so that we could really be building on that when traditional age students come to us. But what we're trying to drive forward is a shift in the way we think about assessment that puts student work at the center, honors faculty judgment, and gets faculty themselves talking, because they're the ones who score the value rubrics, talking about how we can make this program work better for students.
So my provost, who's actually upstairs in another session on faculty buy-in, had attended an AAC&U workshop several years ago and learned about the value rubrics and began working with my faculty before I ever came along on changing our general education. So it wasn't too hard for us, because we'd already started thinking about those outcomes, to then switch it. And last fall, about this time, we were fortunate to get a very nice grant from the Davis Education Foundation that has allowed my faculty, or at least a subset of them, to have a lot of professional development over the last year. And one of the projects that they've worked on is the development of their rubrics. And it's been very interesting to see the amount of conversation and collaboration among the faculty, and really talking for the first time about what they're each trying to accomplish in their individual classes. The scientists, for example, when they got together and they really talked about what went on in the sequence of courses that they expected students to take, found that there were places where they were repeating the same thing over and over and over, and other places where everybody was thinking somebody else was doing it. And in fact, nobody was doing what needed to be done. So they've now much more carefully and deliberately scaffolded and have developed the rubrics to lead the students through that scaffolding. We have, in fact, taken very seriously the notion that students, high schools say they teach critical thinking and stuff like that. So you have to distinguish among the levels of ability. So for our essential learning outcomes, we have rubrics that we apply at the end of 30 credit hours, another set at the end of 60 credit hours, and then another set before they graduate at 120 credit hours to again, scaffold them through the development of the skills that they need to develop. We're very focused on formative assessments. We still use summative assessments, and at this point, we still are assigning grades, but we're being much more careful about using low-stakes formative assessments so that the faculty can much earlier diagnose any issues that students are having. And we learned something from our K through 12 colleagues. I went to a workshop here in Massachusetts that the New England Secondary School Consortium did, and I learned about response to intervention, the RTI techniques that are used. And so we took that to heart, and we've moved our interventions much closer to the point of instruction. So instead of sending students to a separate writing center, we have redesigned our library as the Center for Innovative Learning. Our faculty hold office hours there. They can hold classes there. The writing tutors are there. The math tutors are there. And so it becomes a much more fluid process of getting the assistance for the students much earlier in the process instead of waiting 6 weeks into the semester or, God forbid, by the end of the semester. Yeah, right. So we think we are doing a lot better job with using authentic assessments. And finally, we've allowed faculty a lot of different points of entry in this. We have not said every faculty member must use this. We've basically said, here are where you have to get students. Here are a set of high-impact learning practices that we know will help move students along the way. Pick and choose. And find your own entry point that works for your discipline and works for your teaching style. And then what we believe is that they will begin sharing those, and those will spread across the faculty.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that for us, and I think, as you look at it, let's take a topic like physics. Tough topic to teach, a gateway course that most freshmen struggle with. That's one reason why they jump out of the sciences other areas right away, right? One of the hottest topics to teach to young college students, and usually the gateway course that kicks many kids out. So at Merrimack, we do CBE in that course. We basically took what was 3 labs, built 1 facility, hired more faculty, right? Put the kids in groups, they work on projects, they create those projects, they grade each other on those projects. The faculty members come in and help them do it. It's all team-oriented, and suddenly we see better grades, more kids' involvement, and then moving to the second level of classes. I think lots of colleges are doing stuff like this now. I think the key for all this for CBE to work well in a traditional format or in the classroom is supportive faculty. And I don't think it's just professional development. I think we oversell professional development. I actually think creativity and imagination is key to the success of CBE long-term, both for our students and our faculty. And I think in higher ed, we've become less tolerant of experiments, of ideas, because of the political pressures or the money pressures, whatever they are. So I think the more as we implement CBE in colleges, we have to actually empower people to be more experiential, more experimental, make mistakes, learn, both kids and faculty. Because I think at the end of the day, it's a massive disincentive to be a faculty member and to be told what to do and to follow these patterns when you have a group of kids that actually meet that, right? And so I think this will all be worked over time, but we in our own college already do it by actually changing. We knew we had a problem in physics. We knew that we were killing ourselves and kids getting into engineering and the higher level sciences, and then we had to change it. And we sat down with the faculty, we built them a new facility, brought more faculty in, and got them to change the way they thought about teaching and learning, and want much more authentic assessment, much more engagement and involvement. So I don't think it's just an online, I think it's that. I think every mission of every school can do it differently, but that's key to kind of investing in human beings to think differently about it, because I think, let's be honest, we're in the most educated profession in the world. We have the best and brightest people in the world working in our institutions. The question is, how do we get them to think differently about what they do and how they do it? And I think there's 1,000 different ways to do that.
If I can lean in, and I couldn't agree more, I think that was all wonderfully said. And for those of you who are on campus in this audience, if you are still using teaching of course evaluations that are focused on what the faculty member is doing in the class in front of the students, try to get rid of them as soon as possible. Because we have to shift our attention to whether or not the course is well designed to help, or the experience is well designed, if we are moving beyond courses at this point, to actually develop some portion of the proficiencies that we're talking about. And right now we have got a system misdesigned to answer the questions we want to know the answer to in terms of course evaluations, and gathering no information at all about how well these experiments are working, and not inviting the kind of experimentation that you're talking about. In fact, I suspect really closing it off, especially for pre-tenure faculty, which reminds me, you should ask us about contingent faculty too.
Perhaps I will. But first, how many faculty members in the audience right now? Why are you all sitting over there?
It's like a faculty senate meeting.
So current faculty members, I'm sorry, just once again, show of hands, current faculty members, former faculty members. Okay, that's just about everybody. Future faculty members. Okay, there you go. So if we could just dig into this conversation a little bit, and feel free to talk about contingent faculty as well in this. I'd like to know, and I think most everybody here, given how many former and current faculty members there are curious about what sort of the evolution of the conversations on your campuses and around things like the degree qualifications profile. You know, what's been surprising and interesting? What are some of the lessons that you've learned, maybe some lessons that have been learned the hard way, since those are the ones that tend to stick, about how faculty can be engaged in this work, and to harness the kind of creativity that you're talking about in building these programs. Because we heard this morning in the first panel, you know, this idea that there is, and you hear it and you see it everywhere. You know, somebody said, one of my favorite things to do is to look at, you know, Paul Fain's pieces and then just skip the piece and read the comments at the end to see what's really going on. We do read your pieces, by the way, you know, also. But this idea that CBE represents the deprofessionalization of, you know, so at the end of civilization as we know it, the gutting of quality, the displacement of faculty, the loss of jobs, the end of the things that matter to faculty and to an educated citizenry, right? These are the kinds of anxieties that we hear about and that need to be taken seriously. And so it's really a great opportunity to hear from people inside institutions about what those conversations have been like as they've evolved. So Linda, and then Chris, and then Carol.
We've had wonderful work done by our faculty. I praise them every opportunity I get. I think it helped the provost had already started them thinking about outcomes-based education and about development of rubrics, so it wasn't absolutely brand new. But then I laid the groundwork by sort of, one, laying out some financial realities for our institution and saying, we've got to change or we're going to go out of business, essentially. Giving them some high-level stuff on disruptive forces in higher education, because it's my job to track that. It's not the faculty's job to track that, but to make, to help them understand and have some conversation about it. And then, I'm not sure if Duke Albanese is still in the audience, but we brought him in from a group in Maine called Great Schools Partnership and had him talk about what's happening in public education in Maine. And so we just laid the groundwork that way. And then we were able to provide some resources to them to enable them to do the very creative and hard work that they needed to do. We did a survey recently for the Davis grant, and we're very small, so about 25 faculty took the survey, but there were only 2 who said, we're really not on board with this. Other faculty said, I'm being more creative than I've ever been. I'm having a great deal of fun talking to my colleagues because we're doing interdisciplinary learning communities to get at the development of the proficiencies. They've said things like, this is something I've always wanted to do, but now I feel like the administration is behind me and allowing me to do it. Mm-hmm. So in our case, it's not at all been a deprofessionalization. It is a lot of hard work, and especially because we're trying to do it very quickly. Yeah. But I think it's been very intellectually exciting work. And we focused on the research base for these things, that we've learned a lot from neuroscience about how effective learning occurs and what kinds of activities promote that. And so we talked to the faculty about the research base for it, and I think that's been helpful as well.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, I think we've taken the approach of one size does not fit all, has been our strategy. And so we have tried to leverage I think areas of momentum within the institution. So our English department, for example, is probably I won't say our best department, I would never say that about any department, but a what we think is a very good department that is one of the better ones of the institution. And I would say it's in the top 5, and all 5 being equal, kind of that way. And so I incentivize them to create a writer's house based on the University of Pennsylvania, Kelly's Writers House in Franklin, Marshall. And we bring in about 36 to 40, Pulitzer Prize winning National Book Award writers every year for a whole day. And it's all run by the kids. I hired a full-time director to run it, but they're with all the English faculty. And they've spread now across the campus to different areas. And they have a literary journal, and the kids create things. And the vibrancy, the intellectual vibrancy, and kind of now faculty bring other classes in. And it's created this really kind of very unique kind of applied learning, competency-based set of activities where we actually assess, at the end of the day, you can see it in the writing, but you can also see it in how kids think about problems, how they think about how they address an issue. But there's nothing like sitting down with somebody and connecting with them, an author or somebody else. So to me, that's one of the keys. On the other side, the business side, we put a Bloomberg's Market Lab in, and every single one of our finance majors gets certified in Bloomberg. And that's how we assess, can you get the certification? And they're all certified, they go off and get great jobs on Wall Street and this and that. But you can't leave the business school without being certified. And so that facility really does matter to us. And then we build around that all the activities. One of the keys has been not to overburden the faculty. Mm-hmm. To say, you can have a writer's house, but you have to run it. That's just, they're already busy enough and are struggling already. And so we bring more people in and make priorities. And for us, I think the key for CEB is setting priorities. Deciding what you're not going to do is almost more important than what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been our success so far, and what we're trying to do is decide we're not going to be everything to everybody. We're going to be this, and we're going to do it really, really well. And the result of that, we're a small college, but we're booming because we've decided to do those things and not do other things. And I think a lot of times what happens in higher ed is we add more, and don't subtract. Yeah. And then we wonder why it isn't working. because people's workloads are like 8 courses and got to do assessments, and it's like, and by the way, you don't get a raise this year. It's not the most motivating thing in the world. And so to me, my job as a college president is to more about setting the course and in motivating people, but sometimes helping not do certain things and setting up. And I think we've been successful in that by providing that kind of structure. And I think our faculty are thriving under that. And when I say one size does not fit all, is that at the end of the day, I think just saying to everybody, we're going CBE and it's what you're going to do, is actually the worst way to do it. I actually think every discipline is different, every faculty member is different, and the key is to give them tools and assets to do that. So we, for example, I've given every one of my faculty members an iPad and put together a whole program for them to do that. Now, some of them will never use it. And when I first put it, people were like, oh, we should spend that money. I'm like, of course we do. Just spend it, and let's do it the right way. We brought people in to kind of show them, and set up little working groups, and before you know it, ideas are coming, people think differently about assessment. They're kind of now driving the boat, and I think that you have to have the patience to do that. But I think CBE will work, and the idea of competency-based education and outcomes will work when we stop going to one size fits all and try to think about the different affinities in organizations, the different missions, and put those pieces together. And I think I think we have enormous potential in this country. I think higher education is going to, personally speaking, save this country. I think it's the one place where ideas come together, people can do stuff. And my hope is that as this will take time, we'll learn how to do this the right way.
Great. Carol, I want you to say something about contingent faculty, if you wouldn't mind.
I will, but I also want to say that Chris and Linda are illustrating what we as a big association with over 1,300 institutional members see all the time, which is that there is a huge amount of creativity and inventiveness on the ground, on campuses, large and small, public and private, two-year institutions often leading in this space. And is our press still here? Nowhere near enough attention turned on the creativity that's adding up to a new frontier for outcomes-oriented, proficiency-based, active forms of learning that build power for students and for our future. Contingent faculty. The only preparation I ever had to teach at all, much less to link my course to intended outcomes, came when I was an administrator at the University of Chicago, but I was invited to be a so-called visiting faculty member at the School for New Learning at DePaul University, which has been competency-based since the late 70s. And I taught there for a couple of years. The institution had already worked out the framework for a degree in terms of 5 competency areas. If you go and look at School for New Learning now, you'll see an updated version of what they had at the time. One of the competency areas was teaching students how to learn, but the others were rewrites of the traditional arts and sciences, and then the students' professional interests were woven into that. So I was a visiting faculty member, but every faculty member to teach there had to learn how to write a syllabus keyed to the expected competency outcomes. And the way they did this was to dock your pay a bit if you didn't show up for the day-long training. So of course we all went. And it's, and it's the first time anybody ever asked me what outcomes I was teaching to, how they linked to this pre-existing competency framework, this is the key thing, what assignments I intended to give the students to do in order to help them develop the couple of competencies my course was keyed to. It was a history course. And how I would know, what criteria I would be using. Now I realize I was writing a rubric all by myself just to do the syllabus, which it was a very long syllabus. But the point is, there was an intentionality made possible by the fact that the faculty had already thought through what that degree broadly was supposed to be about. But just as Chris has said, there was a great deal of theme and variation. The degree was going to have certain component elements to it, as all our degrees do now when we have breadth and depth. But they were going to play out differently depending on the students' interests and backgrounds and preparation. But the point is that the intentionality that the focus on learning outcomes brought to this made it possible for me as a faculty member just arriving there to have a communal relationship with the students, who actually very much valued this framework, and with the other faculty. And one of the things that the institution did was to have the more experienced faculty visit a new faculty member's class and give us feedback about the relationship between the syllabus and what was actually going on in our meetings with students. So I believe this kind of intentionality can create a new form of community in which contingent faculty work side by side with the tenure line and tenure faculty. There's lots of other problems we have to solve for contingent faculty. I don't pretend this is the only one, but I do think this is one area where competency-based learning or proficiency-based learning can, in fact, help visiting faculty.
Great. So I want to create an opportunity for some couple of questions. Is that okay? I'm getting the, God, I thought we had 1:45, but I'm getting looks here and the hook is coming up. But let's get some questions going.
And
So
tell
it's
us who you are, please.
Yeah, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Mary Avery, and I'm at Wheelock College, the Aspire Institute. And we spend time looking at a good deal of learners that are non-traditional, folks that are getting in-service training. And one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is the role of mentoring and coaching. I've heard those words thrown in a little bit today about faculty non-traditional role. I've heard tutoring, mentoring, coaching. So I'm really curious about how that fits in.
Linda, would you want to dive into that?
Well, I think different institutions would answer that differently. As part of the Competency-Based Education Network, I know that some of the institutions there that are in online, completely online and self-paced programs have disaggregated the faculty and do have a separate role that is a coach. So it's somebody who's assigned to a student. I believe, Alison, you may be able to correct me on this, but I believe they're assigned to a student and they usually stay with that student throughout their whole program, regardless of what content area they might be working in at the time. That's not what we've done. We have professional advisors who wrap around the faculty advisors, and then we have our student support services. But what we're doing has a much more traditional faculty model, and we use the words advisors or mentors as opposed to coach.
Yeah. I can give you just one bit of advice, dealing with this all the time. And you call them different names. So when I ask my students, and I literally sit in one of the sites and say, everybody complains about advising and coaching, and we all have tons of them, right? And I say, how come everybody's complaining? And I say, how many people like your advisor? All the hands go up. How many people don't? A couple. What I realized in my years of doing this is that at the end of the day, where advising always gets a bad rap or this or that is when two people don't get along and you put them together. The key is to find a system where when a student, for whatever reason, doesn't connect with a coach or a mentor, and it happens a lot, that you can move them to somebody else and get them to try different people. That's one of the keys to coaching and advising. It isn't just a model and a whole plan. It's actually two human beings sometimes just don't connect. And good coaching, just like any good teacher, sometimes you connect and don't connect. So in any model that you set up, whatever you decide to do, because I think it's important to have coaches and mentors, remember, most of the time coaching systems fail because they never think about what happens when the student doesn't interact with the faculty member and they don't get along. And many times the student feels disempowered to say something because they're worried about their grade. So you've got to figure out as an administrator to set up a system, because that will get more kids to be successful. I found in my school when I just set up timeout. You don't like that faculty member? I don't know why, it doesn't matter. How do I find you another person you fit with? And sometimes it has nothing to do with personality, it has to do with just different affinities.
So you're saying it's not just role, it's process, it's the matchmaking process.
The matchmaking is, I think, the most important part of coaching. You can do all the training you want, but at the end of the day, some people react differently to it, some people connect with different people. I think you have to realize that people are going to fail, right? At the coaching because of personality, whatever else the reason is, and find some way to identify that and move them quickly. What we've done is to train our faculty, say, it's okay, if you can't connect with this kid, let us know, we'll move them to somebody else. But that's the experiment part, and in many ways, the system we've set up in this country is, here's your advisor, here's your student, the two don't connect, so be it. And that's where I think we lose a lot of people. Anybody knows, it's like a roommate in college or anything else, or working with a boss you don't like. If you get in that emotional state, it's very hard to focus on anything else. And then sometimes I think we give a lip service to the reality of the human interaction is really, really important.
Great. Carol, and then another question.
I think we all have to really be aware of models that are built on the removal of faculty from the teaching and learning role. I think our goal as as an enterprise that's reinventing the practice of higher education, needs to be to put scholarly faculty working together with active students on questions to which nobody knows the answer, where faculty can help students understand what it means to explore the evidence, to look into the issues, to learn from many sources. The notion, and some programs are built on them, that a generic coach is all the student needs to get through the online material is, in my mind, a design for underachievement.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
My name is Mike Maripodi. I'm the Dean of Online Programs and Interinstitutional Affairs at Quincy College. And in a previous life, I was a K-12 administrator. And I spent a great deal of time with my faculty reminding them that it was not productive to impose adult sensibilities on young children, that we were in the process of education and not legislation. While there needed to be some structure and rules, clearly we couldn't expect from a 7-year-old the same type of behavior that we would from our colleagues. And so fast forward to the 19-year-olds that we're working with, whose probably most significant decision this week was what movie to attend on Friday night. How do we craft an undergraduate program where we aren't imposing our adult sensibilities on 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds because we've gone to the workplace, we've gone to the marketplace, we know what everyone wants, but somehow we're expecting this of students that perhaps don't have the maturity or the experience to get there. What does a competency-based education program look like that would address that?
Let me jump in on that, because that's something that AAC&U has been thinking a lot about in the context of our centennial, which we'll be celebrating in 2015. One of my friends said all curricular discussion is autobiographical, so I'll go back to a little piece of mine. When I was an 18-year-old and taking a required freshman course at Mount Holyoke that I did not want to take in English, and being taught how to do research, the faculty member did us all the favor of bringing each of us in one at a time for a conversation about a question that really mattered to us. Now, the question I gave her was, it would make you laugh if I told you, I'm not going to entertain you that way, but the fact of the matter is, because she was a thoughtful, wise, scholarly person, she was able to turn my very naive question into something that was really worth looking into, giving me the feeling of incredible intellectual power as an 18-year-old at Mount Holyoke. Now later, I actually reread the paper I wrote that semester, and it was naive and underdeveloped. It was not at all, in fact, what it was in my head. But by taking the students' questions seriously as a point of departure, and this is what we're going to be recommending to all of our members as we build on the next iteration of LEAP, it's the notion that every student should come into college told from the outset that you are here to develop the passion and the proficiency and the experience to work on a problem or question that's important to you. And that's also important to society. And you're going to have a couple of years to figure out what that is. But by the time you're done, we're going to be expected to see meaningful work, project-based work from you. Take different forms, could be research, could be an internship, could be service, could be just a clustered set of courses in a portfolio, but something that shows what you were really about in college. And so I think we have to do students give them the respect of recognizing there are questions on their mind, however naive and innocent they may be, and it's our job to help them explore the issues behind those questions, take them to another level, and put them on a path towards self-directed learning, which is what a liberal education is finally all about.
One of the first things I learned from my K through 12 colleagues in Maine was the concept of voice and choice, and that students are more engaged, more motivated if they have a voice in how they learn and a choice in how they demonstrate their learning.
That's great.
So we've taken that very much to heart and encouraged the faculty to figure out how to implement that, give them options in terms of assessments, options in terms of topics. So that's one thing. The second thing is we'd done a lot of research, we'd looked at the literature, but we also knew that students are going to see it differently. So this is our pilot year. We gave scholarships to about 15 students to be innovative learners, and their job is to give us feedback on how we're doing. We'll be doing interviews with them, focus groups with them, and learning as much as we can. And we'll continue that as a way to actually get the student voice and hear what they think is working and what's not working.
Yeah, I actually think if for a second, if I was you, I think so much in education, we always put people through all these kind of content courses, and then we do a capstone, we're supposed to link it all together. I actually think that's the wrong model. I remember when I was in graduate school at Penn, I took a course with a guy named Peter Kurloff. It was an organizational psychology course. It was a very competency-based hands-on course. And he brought us all into a room. And we all sat in a room, all 20 of us, and he left. And he never came back. And I learned more in that class than any other class in my entire life. Because I'm like, people were freaking out, they were going crazy. But I learned what it's like to work in a group and in process. And we somehow, a lot of bright people in our room, figured out how to get through and get a grade. I don't know what we did, but I learned a lot that I've used my whole life. And I would actually take the kids first. And I would actually put them in it doesn't matter the question, let them design their own, give them a question, and let them go figure it out together. And then assess them on how do they work together, what they did, and ask them those questions. I think that's more valuable in terms of how to figure out how to learn and assess people's skills than almost anything else you could do. So instead of a capstone course, make it the first course, make them all come together, make them work in groups, make them design and think through, make them fail. The greatest learning skill we can give people is to learn how to fail and then pick yourself up and do it again and learn better. I think that's a huge competency that a lot of kids who come to college now do not know how to fail, are afraid to fail, and then they do fail and think the world is ending. And the reality is that's so far from the truth. We don't teach kids reality anymore. And I think this is what all this stuff does. So I would think, I don't know what it would look like in your school, how you do it, but you should think about these 19-year-old kids coming in and how do you set up a situation, if you're online, where they learn, we don't want them to fail out, but to kind of learn what it's a fail, to learn, go back and forth. I think that's important to do, because I think so many of our kids today are afraid to fail or just give up because they don't know how to fail. And it's the worst outcome, which I think demotivates you to learn very quickly. And we're smart people. We're going to figure out how to help kids be successful, adults be successful, by creating situations where they can do stuff. So that's what I would look at in terms of that. I think that's a way to do it. And we'll look at the process of failing and learning and what they're doing together instead of the outcome of do they know the content. I think if they learn that first, the content's much easier because you understand why you're learning it then.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time, and I want to thank our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks to a great panel. Lunch is on the 4th floor, straight out through the lobby. There are elevators to the 4th floor. Thanks again.